So I made a totally throwaway comment on Chanel Fall's Twitter this week saying that I came across this podcast, the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario podcast, and I had a listen to their most recent episode, and I said, I said I was going to make a video out of it. So anyway, that seemed to have a lot of people responding saying that I should. So I'm going to have a go doing this. Now, I have had the flu this week, so I'm not at my best, but I'll try to get through this because it was not actually my intent to do this at all, but never mind. For those who don't know me, my name is Melanie Bennett. I'm the co-host of the Gender Wars podcast, and sometimes I do little videos like this where I might look into something that may be of interest to parents or just the general public in Canada about some of the goings-on in the education system. And this one will not disappoint. So the purpose of this is to hopefully whet your appetite in terms of where to go to find primary source information about what's going on in our schools. I don't like to just take people's word for it in terms of what's going on in the education system just because they've said so online. I like to really try to find the information myself. So this is a good example of a place that you can look. You can look at their other podcasts or listen to their other podcasts. But for today, we're going to listen to one from Erika Shaker on defending public education. Let's go.
Elementary,
Elementary,
a podcast from the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario.
a podcast from ETFO.
You are listening to Elementary, a podcast for teachers, education workers, and anyone who wants to know more about public education in Ontario. I'm Megan Perry. In this episode, we'll hear about defending public education from the Director of the National Office of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, Erika Shaker. Here's a sample.
There is insufficient focus on the history of social movements, both our successes and our failures, which means we're not great on tactics. We're also not great on educating future and even current generations about the benefits of the gains that have been made, the continuum of those gains, and the reminder that nothing can be taken for granted.
That was Erika Shaker. We'll hear more from her in a moment. But first, as part of ETFO's 25th anniversary podcast season, we'll hear from a few ETFO members. Here they are.
I'm just
talking
going
about
to
what
forward this bit.
inspires them.
Even when my class is incomplete.
Those were the voices of ETFO members talking about the inspiration for their work in public education. Those voices show how dedicated ETFO members are to their work. Protecting and enhancing public education is the only way to ensure that everyone has access to quality public education. But conservative governments across Canada continue to underfund and under-resource public schools. The push for more corporate involvement in education has a long history, but so do movements that defend public education. Since 1997, Erika Shaker has been monitoring corporate involvement in public education. She is the director of the National Office of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. The CCPA is Canada's leading source of progressive policy ideas, providing economic analysis rooted in the values of social justice and environmental sustainability.
Right off the bat, she's telling you it's a think tank. It's a progressive think tank. Essentially, you'll see what I mean when I say she seems pretty socialist to me when you listen to it. But yeah, it's a policy think tank, and she's giving a talk for the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario. But it's, let's just listen.
Erika Shaker was the keynote speaker at ETFO's annual Political Action Conference for 2024. Here's her address.
When I first started looking at the privatization of education back in the early 90s, which really dates me, even before I joined the CCPA to head up their education project, my focus was on commercialization, which was in many ways easier to identify and address. It's very visible, which of course is the point. It's all about branding, and it provides an easy narrative: cash-strapped schools versus corporate predators. And it was a great point of entry to the bigger issues like individualization and the neoliberal approach to public services in general, or at least so I thought, because it turned out to not be the case. Instead, those in-your-face elements that made it so easy to identify and rally around obscured the depth of the problem. It also gave advocates a false sense of achievement. It suggested that when we vanquished Youth News Network, I don't know if folks remember Youth News Network, I do, Pepsi or Future Shop, we had defeated privatization. We had saved the schools from snake oil salesmen peddling corporate curriculum supplements. Because unlike Americans, setting aside all of our dance-a-thons and bake sales, we valued public education and made sure that we properly funded it. But as we know all too well, Canadian arrogance is often misplaced.
Okay, this is where I'm going to make my first comment. I don't disagree, or I agree, I guess, in some sense, that corporatization of education, she talked about Pepsi and Future Shop, is not a great idea. I don't support that. I don't think we should be educating our kids in the service of the corporate gain either. So I'll agree with that. So my critique today is not actually going to be in defense of corporatism in any way, shape, or form. Um, but I'll provide. Oh, has she said it yet? I don't know if she said it yet. Let's see if she said it.
Cuts were layered on top of years of laurel coasting and insufficient funding against the backdrop of growing inequality.
Yeah,
And it turns out
I think she said it. So she talked about the individualization of education, but she did it in a way that made it seem like right at the very beginning that was linked to the corporatization of education. So she's linking individualism, which is a liberal value, a value of liberalism. So individualism is liberalism, right? She's linking that with corporatism, which is and privatization, which is in the benefit of corporation, which isn't really liberalism. Like those are two different things. I guess you could argue it's capitalism, but they're not the same. And she sort of force-teamed these together. And I find that to be quite disingenuous, actually. So right off the bat, she's a little bit disingenuous.
out that the parental choice privatization routes on both sides of the border are interconnected and play on and weaponize some legitimate and many illegitimate grievances with institutional power structures, grievances that have been made even worse by underfunding and that growing inequality.
Okay, and again, she brings in parental choice with privatization. So we're equating individualism from liberalism with corporatism, and then we're bringing parental choice into that as well. So this really piqued my interest when I listened to it the first time. It was when she was talking about parental choice and linking that to somehow corporatism. So Shaker's comparing parents' desire to determine what kind of education their child receives with corporatism, right? Because that's privatization. It's all under the same banner. So I don't see why parents shouldn't have the right to make choices for their own children, but never mind. She also says that Canadians are just following Americans. It's when parents want to choose for their children, they're just following those Americans, those silly Americans that Canadians don't like to be like, which again I find a little bit disingenuous because Canadian parents have the ability to make choices too. Don't forget, Canada was founded on the values of liberalism, which came from the UK. So that's a pretty normal thing to do. We know they don't like normal, but that's a pretty normal thing to do. So let's keep listening.
Commercialization is the visible tip of an enormous privatization iceberg that the far right and the people who court the far right tells us isn't privatization at all. It's about saving children or protecting families or honoring some imagined shared homogenous history, as evidenced by defending passport imagery and the whole Keep Moms and Mother's Day celebrations. There is certainly.
She hates you. If you're not a socialist, she hates you. Basically, she is a socialist. Right now, it's not even okay. So I skipped a bit, but we're 5.5 minutes in, and it could not be more obvious that this woman is a socialist. She's now calling everyone who is not a socialist the far right. Okay, so I'm not the far right. I'm not even milquetoast right. I'm a liberal, not a capital L liberal, but I believe in liberalism, and I'm not going to pretend to be a conservative simply because The capital L liberals have become crazy. I believe in liberalism, so I am a liberal. But I'm put in the category of far right because I disagree with socialism. And that's what she's doing. I actually did a whole video on that, which I'll try to remember to put in the comments. If not, it's on a playlist called Queer Marxism, Queer Education in Canada. And it explains this attack on the far. What does far right mean? Okay, so if you're liberal, even if you're capital L liberal, if you're not a socialist liberal, they're talking about you. Erika Shaker is talking about you. The ETFO thinks you're the far right if you're a liberal who's not a socialist. So if you're not far left, that's what it means. And this gets me every single time. This is the union that oversees the teachers, the elementary teachers in Ontario. So yeah, don't forget also she's talking about privatization. Okay, so again she's equating the corporatism. So she's giving an illusion of talking about the corporatism, linking it to parents. Why? Because it's the idea of private property. Private property is abhorrent to socialists because no one owns anything under communism. That's not a thing. So owning things to them is a bourgeois thing to do. Okay? By property, they don't just mean your home. They don't just mean your car. They don't just mean your ability to be an entrepreneur, to maybe run your own business or anything like that. They also understand parental rights to be private property ownership. So the nuclear family is a type of private property, right? Because it has some individual liberty within there. They don't like that. So they have to attack anything that is private. And they call it privatization because it appeals a little bit more. They said it's a progressive group, so it appeals a little bit more to the people who call themselves progressive liberals, who think they're liberals, but actually they're just becoming like, I don't even know, Muppets for socialist actors like this. So she doesn't mean, when she's talking about privatization, she also means to attack your family if it isn't the collective.
Certainly money to be made off education. But more importantly, there is a commonwealth, a sense of community and collective responsibility to be dismantled. It's no surprise that the
Collective
so-called parental
responsibility.
choice movement is leveraging a more individualistic approach to public education. This is the essence of privatization, the elevation of the private over the public, the individual over the collective.
I mean, she just gave it away again. Privatization, the elevation of the private over the public. She is saying she's a socialist and education should be for socialists, and anyone who isn't is the far right.
And the corporate over the commons. We hear about the liberating nature of free choice. But as we know, it's never about choices within a responsive, high quality, accountable public system that constantly strives to improve how it supports kids and communities, particularly those who have historically been ill-served and marginalized by the state. It's constraining the public system to a certain type of choice, a certain narrative frame, and a select number of options. If you dare to advocate for more within the public system so all kids might benefit, you're on your own.
Okay, I'm gonna pause. I'm not gonna keep pausing the whole way through, but I'm just gonna pause a few times at the beginning to give some context. She was talking about the community over the individual, and that it's not serving the minority. Now, the individual is the biggest minority there is. It is, if you want the single largest minority, if that can make sense, it is the individual, not the community of individuals that make, like, let's say, the gay community or the disabled community. These are socialist ideas. These communities are they don't really exist. They're just a means of praxis. Okay, so all kids. So if the individual is the largest minority, then all kids would benefit from being treated as individuals, not as part of a community of all these intersectional identities. So why do they hate individuals so much? It's because socialists clearly do not care about minorities like they claim. This is my opinion. I think many of them think they do, but really they care about communism. They care about socialism. They really think that that's going to fix everything. Um, so to do that, it's all about power. It's all about accusing people of having privilege, using all of these things as a means of overthrowing the system like bratty teenagers. They're not there to build. They're not builders. They're overthrowers. They're destroyers. And they do it while throwing their toys out of the pram and having tantrums. Like, this talk is essentially a huge, like, socialist tantrum, right? They also, I've noticed a lot of socialists really mask what they really mean. Okay. They mask what they mean and they lie. And they because they do this, they think that everyone else also masks what they mean and lie. So for Erika here, when she comes across people who defend parents' rights like me, in her mind, my secret agenda is that I'm a far right, I don't even know, far right agitator, and really I'm homophobic and all of these things. When that's not the case, I literally am defending the rights of parents to determine what education their children should receive and to be heard. Okay, that's what I'm defending. Now, guess what? There are some people who are religious. There are some people who are not religious. There are some people who are left leaning, and there's some people on the right. Now, there's even some people that I met that are NDP voters who aren't interested in this stuff in school either. So this is a mixed bag of different people, different ethnicities, whatever. So this is literally about parents defending their ability to be able to have some kind of say over what's taught to their kids, because they don't believe that the community should be raising children. This is what it is. There's no nefarious underlying lying agenda. And they believe that because most of the time they actually have one themselves, or they're being driven by people who do, and they don't understand that they're being manipulated. Like, this is what I've discovered through my own research, and the ETFO is no different. I'm kind of on the fence about it. I think there's a lot of people in this union that are like pretty out there and they know exactly what they're doing, but I think a lot of people are just following along like idiots who don't even know what they're doing. But that's just my speculation. I don't actually know a lot of them personally. But don't forget, this is the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario spouting these views.
Or you're on your own dime. Not to mention the parents who would love to bill the public for what they've spent in the private education market to access the opportunities they feel their children should be entitled to, either because the public system is too focused on equity and extras rather than the basics,
Equity is equal outcomes. It's a fancy word for communism.
or because it's not focused enough on extras and enrichment, at least where their kid is concerned. The ugly irony, of course, is that in spite of the hijacked terminology of free or equal choice, the attacks on equity and the funding required to provide it impacts the most marginalized kids, kids with disabilities, or those who require significant supports to be safe and to learn, for whom the system must do better, but who have no options outside of an increasingly underfunded public system.
Communism is not the solution.
And it's because this agenda isn't about success or fairness or excellence at all. It's not about kids. It's not even about parents. It's about fear. Fear of change, fear of losing control, fear of not being in charge of our own lives. And of course, there's a huge economic anxiety element to all this.
Okay, so that's what I just meant to say. She's literally accusing other people of what they're doing. They're mischaracterizing, they're twisting. Some of it is outright lying and then accusing parents like me of doing just that. Parents like me are defending the kind of education that they want for young kids. Look, my kid's not actually in K-12 education anymore, but I'm doing this because I didn't realize this was going on in education while I was there. I'm trying to raise awareness for other parents to be able to make the choice, because they're not transparent. They're not transparent about their aims. They're not transparent about their goals. If you look at the literature, it tells you quite blatantly what they're trying to do. If you look at the policies, if you listen to their talks, to their PD, they're pretty clear when they think they're speaking to their own, and then when they speak to you, it's all masked. And then this lady is then accusing parents of fear mongering. No, we're not. We're raising awareness because these people have been lying for a very long time.
And it's about using that fear, not to find solutions that would address that very real sense of powerlessness, but rather to identify useful scapegoats to blame for it while gutting the system in the name of family or common sense or rights. We need to look at the parental choice movement through 4 related lenses: privilege, privatization, populism, and patriarchy.
Through the lens of
Privilege highlights
Marxism.
and informs the unequal relationship we have with the concept of choice. Because as much as it's framed as apolitical, choice doesn't happen in a vacuum, whether at the supermarket or in real estate, and certainly not in education.
Education is
Not
political.
everyone has access to the same choices or lives with the choices they make or that others make on their behalf in the same manner. Education choice can take many forms, from special programs to boutique schools to outright privatization. But it's almost always cloaked in the language of what's going to work best for my kid.
What the hell is wrong with asking what's best for your child? What the hell is wrong with that? I'll tell you what's wrong with that. That's considered private property. That's not part of the collective, and that's not okay. And so she's going to go on an attack with the little ETFO buddies, calling all parents who are pushing back, right wing. Like, well, how is right wing become an insult? I'm not even conservative or right wing, but it's not an insult. People have a different way of understanding the world, and that doesn't make them wrong. And your inability to actually listen to them is what got us here, Erika.
And who could argue with a parent making choices about what's best for their child, even if we're somewhat fuzzy about whether the choice is about what best supports their child's learning, like downtime or
None of your
trips to the
business,
water
Erika.
fountain, versus the control a parent asserts over their child, like insisting on being informed if their child has joined a GSA.
So here we go. She hates you. She hates you. ETFO and Erika Shaker hate you. Why do they hate you? Because you want to have a say about how you want to raise your child. And if you don't want to let your child go to a GSA because you've learned that they do gender ideology there and that they're teaching boys can be girls and that they're encouraging them with breast binders or whatever it is that they're doing in your local area because you've actually bothered to read the resources and you go, hang on, that's not okay. I'm not okay with this. If you do that, oh, well, now we're going to question you. Oh, maybe you're an incompetent parent. You're trying to control your child. What are you doing? And you go on this whole attack. She hates you. The ETFO hate you.
It's a slippery slope or a slippery cliff. Starting with the advocacy one might see at a school council meeting when deciding where to spend fundraising dollars and whose parental choices get prioritized. Of course, some parents can and do advocate much more effectively than others as a result of opportunities and access to the system that not everyone has. And that is exactly the point. When we start from the premise of scarcity, the loudest and most confident voices at the decision-making table, the parents who happen to know the principle or simply have more time to make their case, have an advantage when fighting over limited funds.
The parents who have more time to make their case. Now, I know that school boards are trying to shorten delegation times. They're trying to make it really difficult for people to actually present. They're trying to decide what gets to be heard at a school board. They're making it as difficult as possible for parents to push back by following the rules. So again, disingenuous. Erika, if she knows anything about the education system in Ontario, will know these things that I'm saying right now. But she's trying to paint a picture like, oh, it's just these right-wing parents that have all the time because I don't know, the mom is maybe a homemaker and that's part of a nuclear family and she has all the time in the world and she's buddy-buddy with the principal, when this is not the case. Absolutely not the case, because any parent that is not socialist has a really hard time to get getting their point across. In fact, can be even trespassed, removed, physically removed. It's just unbelievable, this, Erika.
All this normalizes the move away from collective approaches that recognize the need for a broad, well-resourced system with flexibility for learning needs and interests, and towards a model that is based on funding per student, which has declined
Collective model. Collective model. That means communist model.
by $1,200 adjusted for inflation per student since Ford was elected, and whose needs get prioritized within the steel trap of scarce resources. This is where parental choice leverages not just an individualized frame, but a privatized one. And it rarely stops at school council meetings because privilege is portable.
Here's the boogeyman. Okay, she's accusing people like me of driving like fear. Okay, people like me just want to be heard. People like me want to engage with the education system. People like me want to be taken seriously, that we don't think that this is necessarily a good idea. We want accountability. We want transparency. Okay, that's what we want. It doesn't have to go further than that. We can have those discussions, but they're not interested. Okay, they're not interested. They just want to build this idea. They literally want communism in schools. They want their little functional units of socialism. That is the education system right now. And they're going to build this idea that, well, if we let them, if we let them want to have parental choice, then that's going to lead on to this privatization where corporations are going to overtake the education system, because it's just, that's the fear mongering here. Why do they do that? Because they're communists. You need to understand that it's not just universities that are going through these issues that have been completely corrupted by far left radicals. Okay, it is the K to 12 education system. So I mean, to be fair, recently I just saw one of these like gender ideology books posted on Chanel Fall's timeline on Twitter for daycare. So it's not even just K to 12. Like they really just want to turn schools into socialist boot camps.
The next lens is privatization, starting with parents who have the funds or social cachet to keep pressing refresh while the registration website reloads, or stay up all night in lineups, in addition to paying for any extra coaching required to help ensure their child's successful application to a boutique program or a special magnet school. These programs are still nominally public, of course, and can't discriminate, but they can use coded expressions like good fit during the selection process. They may also come with a fee, and of course, with the assurance that no one will be turned away for financial reasons. But of course, the choice to self disclose often has its own challenges. These are the allowances that have been made to keep discriminating parents happy with the public system, so long as there is just enough specialization to enrich their kids' interests and needs without going full private school. For you chefs in the audience, it's
Did
sort
you
of
just
like
hear that?
tempering the public
Oh,
with a dose of the private.
did you hear that? I think I'll go back. I think she was just saying that look, we've made concessions for you, you right wingers. By the way, I'm not a right winger, but we made concessions for you. Why don't you just take them? I want to listen to that again.
Expressions like good fit
Oh, good fit.
during the selection
Yeah.
process. They may also come with a fee, and of course, with the assurance that no one will be turned away for financial reasons. But of course, the choice to self disclose often has its own challenges. These are the allowances
The
that have been made
allowances.
to keep
These are the allowances they've given us. Oh, thanks, Erika.
discriminating parents happy with the public system.
You're a discriminating parent. If you're not one of us, you discriminate. We made allowances for your discrimination.
So long as there is just enough specialization to enrich their kids' interests and needs without going full private school. For you chefs in the audience, it's sort of like tempering the public with a dose of the private, otherwise the system will curdle and then everyone sees the fundamental divide. Carry one step further, it's the charter model, where public dollars pay for schools that look very private. But just because charter schools aren't in Canada, other than Alberta, it doesn't mean the same mindset isn't at work. It's merely one step further along the privatization continuum. The final, well, at least for now, step is the voucher or tax credit model, where private parental choice is funded by public dollars. Currently, BC, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and to some extent Nova Scotia have pursued this model, but it's been full body embraced by Alberta and Quebec, with severe equity implications, as our friends at SOS Alberta, ERIS, and L'École Ensemble have demonstrated.
So the equity implication of all those things, so equity being equal outcomes for all, I guess, is that these new ideas of education. Look, I don't know the ins and outs of voucher and charter school and all this stuff, but my understanding is that parents are pretty fed up. Parents want different types of education. If the public education system is going full radical socialist, and they want a merit-based system. So that's what she's calling privatization, is this merit-based system. So the equity implication is that the kids are going to be expected to actually learn something and actually advance on their own merit rather than the intersectional model. That's what she's saying.
Have demonstrated. There are nascent initiatives in other provinces too, like Ontario, where the government implemented catch-up payments of $200 to $250 per child to offset extra education-related costs incurred during COVID, such as tutors, who, of course, market share exploded, rather than comprehensive investment in public education for all kids. I don't know if folks remember in the early 2000s, the Fraser Institute, working with the W. Garfield Weston Foundation, created Canada's first limited voucher program called Children First, which provided 150 disadvantaged, their words, children in Ontario with scholarships of up to $3,500 to attend private or religious schools. And that's the other issue. Individualized handouts provide a fraction of the benefit of collective pooling of resources. But that would require a pro-public, universal approach to the programs from which we all benefit, rather than an individualized approach that provides a public subsidy for parents who can afford private choices, while further depleting reserves through tax cuts that benefit the wealthiest and ensuring ongoing underfunding of public infrastructure. Populism is a political frame that prioritizes ordinary people, while
Populism is simply liberalism, a liberal democracy. That's what populism is. It is when the majority vote for things. That's kind of what it is. Now, there's a populist uprising now, and it tends to be associated with the far right, but it's just people taking into their own hands, making decisions for what they want their country, their nation, whatever, their school system to be. I used to have a very negative opinion of populism because I was bought into the idea that it was just they were just racist, they were just bigots, they were just all these things. Because don't forget, I come from the left. But look, for a long time, people have been very, very politically apathetic, and that has allowed some very, very determined Marxist slash socialist individuals to agitate the political systems or the institutions that govern our countries in the West. And more individuals are taking their civic duty seriously and asking for something different. Now, I'm not going to agree with every single one of them, and I certainly don't. And they're not going to agree on everything with me. But populism means that people have an individual responsibility to get involved. She doesn't want that. A lot of people on the left see that as bad because people have different desires for what they want to see, and it's not their idea of what they want to see.
While targeting the elites. What makes it regressive or progressive, of course, is who defines what it is to be ordinary, what it means to be elite, and who benefits or who is hurt by the solutions being proposed. Public education is ready-made for populist campaigns. It's community-focused, it's about kids, at least ostensibly, and everyone can relate to it or has an opinion about it.
We should all be getting involved in public education. If you have children especially, you should be getting involved in public education because it affects you and it affects everything. It affects your community. So yeah, get involved, be populist. Who cares if you doesn't like it?
Of course, that too is complex because it's unclear if everyone is talking about the same thing, even if they're using the same terminology. But the fact is, these elements make organizing around public education very powerful, and this is both positive and negative. There is no
So that organizing around public education is positive when it's socialist and when it's what they want. It's negative when it's not what they want and it's what I'm advocating for, which is transparency, to have open discussions about what's going on, honesty, right? And to have diverse viewpoints heard, to have broad public consent, which will require actually having conversations with people you disagree with, Erika.
There is no question that public schools are being scapegoated in the culture wars. This was abundantly clear in the last round of school board elections that saw a social media and organizing campaign targeting progressives and scapegoating trans kids. And I know Understandably, we took great pride, or maybe relief, in seeing so many of those regressive trustee wannabes go down in defeat.
She's talking about Shannon
But
Boucher.
look what's happened since.
She's definitely talking. She's in Ottawa, and I'm quite certain she's talking about Chanel Fall and Shannon Boucher, maybe some other people who ran in the last elections. And F you, Erika, because nobody is scapegoating trans kids. What these people were saying, what they were trying to get at, is that gender ideology is not an appropriate topic to be introducing into school. Queer theory is highly inappropriate. If you want to learn that at university, that's a whole other thing, but it should not be at elementary. She's talking at the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario. Okay. Trans identity is a highly contestable ideology that is for adults and not for children. So I think a lot more trustees who have diverse viewpoints, not just the ones that have been approved by people like Erika and the ETFO, should be running. They should be running campaigns. We should have a much more robust debate amongst different viewpoints across the education system.
Since at the provincial level, New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and then, of course, some dog whistling in Ontario and federally. The last municipal elections, I'm afraid, were a trial balloon. The next elections, federal, provincial, municipal, that's what we need to prepare for.
You're listening to Erika Shaker, Director of the National
Responsive public school system is not new. These zombies keep being resuscitated, and they will always have an audience of stalwart public education critics. But now they're layered on top of decades of insufficient funding, where frustration with leaky roofs and growing class sizes and fewer extracurricular activities and insufficient acknowledgement of system oppression and more standardized tests is increasing, all of which disproportionately hurts already marginalized kids and communities, and all of which was made worse with COVID. And parents who can't afford to look elsewhere in the public system or as a private extra or in the private system just may, especially if there's financial incentive to do so. Some communities are very susceptible to the argument that parents, not government, call the shots and are responsible for, or at least in charge of, their child's education.
Parents are in charge of their child's education, not government.
While some of this can mimic a populist narrative of empowerment in a sort of get off my property kind of way, there's a direct implication that because education is an individualized responsibility, though of course it isn't, those who bear the burden of
Education is an individualized responsibility.
systemic inequality are to blame for their situation or their child's because they made bad choices when it came to getting their kid into the right school. But a well-funded, flexible, community-focused, universal system of public education is also perfectly positioned to counter this narrative of individualization. And that's precisely why public education is once again on the front lines of this right-wing resurgence.
Public education is on the front lines, not because of right-wing resurgence, because they're realizing that the education system has been radicalized, that it does not represent what they want for their own families, and they're saying no. Yeah, that's why. Not because we have some kind of, rising tide of bigotry on the rise here.
Want to end with patriarchy.
Of course, patriarchy.
It's an archetypal power struggle. The traditional family holding off the full force of a government institution that thinks it knows better than actual people.
Okay, I just need to give an explanation. Why does she hate the patriarchy? Well, because the patriarchy, in the mind of a socialist, is a system that creates this gender binary, right? So you have men and women and they're not equal, right? And then men go to work to earn money and women are forced in the home to do the unpaid labor of raising the nuclear family. And all of this is a requirement to uphold capitalism. I mean, it sounds crazy, but that is essentially how a socialist thinks. That's why they hate this thing called the patriarchy. Now, we can argue whether or not this thing even is going on, but in their minds, it is. It's this absolutely awful thing. Never mind that that's probably not. Look, we don't bloody live in a patriarchy. Certainly not in a school, but Anyway, so she has to use this as an attack, because don't forget, the private property attack also includes the nuclear family, because that's a form of private ownership by the patriarchy as well. So they don't want that. They don't like it. It forms these stable units that are not socialist, that she doesn't want.
Father figure knows best versus a feminized, if not feminist, workforce intent on controlling the children and reshaping the future for nefarious ends.
That's what they're doing.
It's not a new narrative, and in some cases, it even appears contradictory. A woke, gender role and gender identity questioning, though definitely not masculine, public education system is somehow authoritarian. Juxtaposed with the little guy, families who just want their kids taught and raised in a way that adheres to and reinforces a hierarchy where the authority of that traditional power structure is not questioned.
She's talking about heteronormativity. So she is full on queer theory here. She is saying that the patriarchy reinforces heteronormativity. So they're saying that they just want merit-based education. They're saying that they want their kids just to learn facts, but really what they're doing is they're reinforcing the social reproduction of heteronormativity, which it only serves to uphold capitalism, whilst then denigrating other people at the same time. Like, the projection from these people is unbelievable. And she's in a crowd full of people that are probably nodding their heads going, yeah, I know, isn't it terrible? Oh, these crazy right-wingers. Like, they just, I've taken the time to really understand so I've had to really understand socialism. I've had to really understand the woke, and I've had to really understand, not just because I want to debunk or anything like that, but really to try to understand where they're coming from, so that I could maybe see if I could find better ways of doing education, or propose better ways of doing education. So I spent a lot of time listening to them, and they are really that paranoid. I just don't know how else to describe it, as just absolute paranoia, whilst blaming other, or accusing of other people of being paranoid. It just baffles the mind.
Questioned. But it resonates with certain segments of the population who are resentful at the perceived erosion of their authority and privilege, and fearful of what it means for their own identities, gender and otherwise. The back in my day crowd who yearn for a return to blackboards and yardsticks and cursive.
What's wrong with cursive?
For schools that don't question parental authority or won't raise difficult questions about sexual health and consent, or gender identity, or residential schools, or Canada's own racism. Yes, even with the Underground Railroad. And it's been extraordinarily effective at mobilizing troops in the culture wars in increasingly volatile ways, maliciously targeting educators who dare to talk about diversity and safe spaces, and perversely labeling marginalized and vulnerable kids and communities as elites. It's also been instrumental in fueling privatization initiatives in education, where public money is demanded of often very willing provincial governments to leverage private selection of schools that more closely resemble a certain set of principles and beliefs. Sometimes it's overtly religious, like Bountiful in British Columbia. Sometimes it's about specialization. But ultimately, it's about the dismantling of a collective commitment to public education, a movement away from publicly provided education to publicly funded private choices, from publicly accountable to privately determined and consumed.
Read between the lines. What she's saying is that there's an attack on socialist education, and there is, because people don't want it. People are rejecting it. Now, those people could be the religious people she's talking about. Sure, they exist, but there are a bunch of other people as well. It's not just one group of person that is being attacked here. But Erika is a socialist, and so everything is, us versus them. I've got to make us sound like the absolute pinnacle of good guy, while they are the terrible, horrible bad guy, and it's a black and white. They talk about not making binaries, but this is such a black and white approach to the situation. Them bad, us good, throughout the entire thing. I would love to hear any one of these socialist types. She wants to call herself a progressive, but she's just a socialist here. But even a progressive, assess what they're doing, or at least try to steelman the other person's position. Try to steelman, which is, in good faith, try to present the other person's perspective, not to vilify them or to make them look bad, but to actually try to understand where they're coming from and to take that into account. I would love to be able to see that. And frankly, I'm also prepared to do the same because I think I've gotten a fairly good grasp on how they're viewing it. So if anybody wants to actually have that kind of discussion with me, I'd love to have it. Doesn't have to be public. I'd still love to have an actual proper good faith interaction about what these issues are, right? Why we cannot meet in the middle, right? Why these educators, these socialist educators, feel like they have to tell you what's right for your own good. And if you disagree, well, you're just those evil religious bigots.
Consumed. It's the worst manifestation of populism because it's not about building on what we have in common and learning from each other, including addressing legitimate concerns with an increasingly underfunded public education system that inadequately addresses internalized oppressive structures. But instead, it motivates us to retreat to what we know and who we know. And this is particularly fraught during a period of progress when assumed structures and the people at the top of them maybe aren't necessarily being toppled, although some of them are, but they're certainly being decentered, where the divine right of kings or those who occupy the throne, whatever that throne looks like, is no longer going unquestioned. So I want to end by identifying a few key trends we're grappling with and engaging with in the course of our work, and perhaps suggestions for.
Okay, I'm just tired now. I'm going to let you listen to the rest of it. I think that was the bulk of the was the bulk of our main messaging. But yeah, like I said, I had a flu and I'm a bit tired, and I did this on the fly. I'll make sure that the link is available for you to go listen. There's other podcasts in there if you're interested in the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario. It's not all socialism stuff. I mean, they do talk about other things. I had a bit of a listen to their other podcasts, some more interesting than others. But anyway, I would highly recommend anyone, well, actually all parents, anybody who has a kid in education, learn what's going on in the education system. Get to know the people driving some of this stuff. If you can engage with it, even better. You're probably going to have to develop a bit of a tough skin. A lot of people are reactionary. I'll say in the pushback, I try not to be reactionary. My personal goal is to be able to steel man, right? To be able to express in good faith where some of these ideologues are coming from. Whether or not that they would do the same thing in return, I don't know. But that's what I'm trying to do. As well as trying to, you keep hearing it's not in schools. It's not in schools. That's not happening. That's my other goal, is to show, yes, it is happening. It's probably worse than you think it is. And it's not even that difficult to find. You just need to have a little scratch and it's right under the surface. Please go look at these things. If you don't want to read academic literature, yeah, I totally get it. But at least you can put some of these podcasts in your ears when you go for a walk or when you go for a drive. So that's my message to you, and hope this was useful.